when I was 15, I got adopted into a really religious family. For them, any sort of sexual thought, desire, any of that was demonic. We would do these camps every 6 weeks where they would sit you down and have something that they called a deliverance, but they would cast demons out of you. I attended over 100 of these. I hosted one when I was 17. You would sit in this chair. They would cast out the demon of lust or the demon of anorexia, the demon of bisexuality, whatever it was. And people would start vomiting. Some would look like they were having seizures. I have no clue. I'm still really sitting with all that happened there. But at the end, they'd say, okay, if you were cleansed of lust and you have a lustful thought, that demon will come back and bring 7 friends.
Jade Bryce, welcome to the Holistic OBGYN podcast.
Hi, I'm so grateful to be here.
I feel like it's kind of like an honor for me because you asked me to come on your show, and I'd sort of been like wondering like, should I ask her? Like it was one of those things where you just get nervous about somebody saying no, and then you asked me, and I was like, can you be on my show too?
Oh, no. Man, that episode of yours on mine was just, we squeezed so much in, and it was such a good episode, and I had so much wonderful feedback. So
yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad. I always, I'm glad I can be a boon to the show and not like, oh my gosh, how am I going to explain this episode away?
Yeah.
You and I met at Tosh and Kyle Kingsbury's house in Austin a couple months ago. And by the time this comes out, it'll be like, gosh, maybe like 4 months after we did the screening of The Business of Birth Control. And that's Ricky Lake and Abby Epstein's new film. If anybody wants to see it, I should just plug it real quickly because it was an awesome film. You and a whole cohort of amazing people in Austin showed up. If you guys want to see the film, my code is beloved50 if you wanted to save 50% off the screening, just because I think I want to say that now so that everybody out there can go and see it. Mm-hmm. You and I talked about this on your episode, but talk to me a little bit about what were your impressions from the film? It was a pretty confronting film, but also probably very validating, I think, for a lot of young women in the audience.
Yeah. I had a lot of anger, come up. Not like the anger that hurts the body, but like the anger that like leads to activism, because I just, there's just so much corruption in the medical industry. And to know that like, it's now, we already know that through a lot of different modes that it has been on young women, but like to know that, that something that, was treated as a form of empowerment, like it just felt so manipulative. And, I told you on the interview with you on my show that I think I was 15, and I had really bad acne. And so they gave me, and kids were mean at my school. Like they would put Noxema all over my locker. And so for me, it was like, yeah, I'll take anything, I wasn't sexually active, but I took birth control to clear up my skin. And within a few months, I could barely breathe. And I went back to that doctor and she prescribed me Xanax. So at 15,
Jeez,
so imagine so it just, there was no care for, I know you don't like to use the word patient. I don't really either, but there was no care for me as a human in that office. And I was a 15-year-old that felt like I couldn't breathe and was having chest pain. And I was maybe in her office for 5 minutes. Like, she didn't check she didn't listen for anything. She didn't ask me what was going on in my life, and so I just, it really saddened me how many women around my age probably got put on the pill and now are in their 30s with autoimmune diseases or, hormonal issues because they haven't been bleeding for the majority of the time that they've had their bleed. And so there was that part. And then I also felt really saddened. I didn't know that when we're on the pill, that we're actually not having a period. It's just a withdrawal bleed. I had no idea. And to me, that was so devastating as well, because a bleed is so sacred. Many of us are not taught that, but it's a time of release. Like we're releasing all that doesn't serve us. We're releasing, when you use it intentionally, you can, the day before your bleed, write down the things that you want to release in your bleed. and then you can, if you use a cup or however other way you can collect your blood. For me, I like to pour it into the earth and give that release to the earth. And it can be such a sacred time, but also like not bleeding takes us out of rhythm with nature. And so the fact that like many women don't even realize that they're not having a period, it was saddening and maddening that so many women are on this pill with no real information about what it's doing to their body.
Yeah. So I think what you're getting at, Jade, is that is really the primary reason that I left the medical system. It's nobody's job to tell a woman, especially as women have been told what they can and can't do for millennia, for everything out under the sun, but especially about what to put into their body or not put into their body. It's really nobody's job to say what you should do. It's your job to make the informed decision, but then it's my job, in order for you to make that decision, to give risk benefits alternatives. And you're maybe the millionth woman who has told me that I was never really counseled on the birth control pill. It was advertised and promoted in a very compassionate way. Like, hey, you don't need to have those pesky periods, or stop with all this silly cramping and acne. Let's just take this pill, without anybody giving you the downsides. That sounds like that was your experience at your OBGYN's clinic. Yeah.
Yeah.
What did they tell you? Do you remember? Like, did they tell you anything about this powerful medicine?
Just to take it at the same time every day. That was it. And, I started my cycle at about 11 years old, and it was extremely heavy.
That's pretty early, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I had so much trauma though. I had so much womb trauma, and I had so much, I was so disconnected to my body. And also, we didn't have much. And so we were often eating McDonald's dollar menu
Got it.
And then the school lunches that are just awful,
Right.
And so I'm pretty
Fried
sure
meat product.
Oh yeah. And disgusting little cartons of milk. And so,
Oh man.
And I was downing a bunch of Pop-Tarts and Dr. Pepper for breakfast. Like I just had a really unhealthy diet. But more than that, I had a lot of trauma in my womb. And, starting at 11 years old, having a very heavy period, as well as a mother that I couldn't even tell that I started my period. I was terrified too, because we weren't allowed to talk about anything that had to do with what we called in our home private parts, anything that had to do with that.
Your no places. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I was a size C bra in 5th grade. Like I couldn't ask for bras. Like anything that had to do with anything remotely sexual could not be talked about. So there was also that stress around my period, but every single month I would go to school and I would bleed on the chair because I was so heavy. I would go through a pad every hour with cramps that would make it. My cramps were so painful, it would hurt to move my toes. And so when they offered me the birth control, they didn't tell me that was going to fix any of that. And I honestly can't remember if it did. I can't remember if my cramps or heaviness got better. I do know that in my late 20s, when I started drinking celery juice every morning on an empty stomach, I also started doing coffee enemas every day for like 3 months.
How old were you then?
About 29.
29. Okay.
I also started working with plant medicine to heal trauma.
Yeah.
Since then, and I'm 38 this year. So in 9 years, I have not had one super heavy flow or painful period, except for one time. And it's because I remember that prior month, I just like went to town on sugary treats, which is not the norm for me, but I like had a really unhealthy gluten and sugar filled diet. And sure enough, that next month I had a really tough period. But in those 9 years since working with that trauma, and we talked about the book, The Cure for All Diseases. And she says that most endometriosis and most painful periods are caused from liver flukes, which cause them as clears. So I'm not sure which of the three. It may have been all three together. But since then, all those reasons that a lot of women take birth control, I was able to heal myself. And the acne, I sadly ended up taking Accutane at 19, which screwed up my vision. That was
Yeah.
another pill that didn't tell me that
Yeah.
that would happen, but
Yeah. When we were talking, maybe it was on your show or just in the way that, our chats we've had, you mentioned womb wounds and you brought it up a little bit before and you related it to your, what I would call precocious puberty. You're a little bit earlier onset menarche than other girls your age.
Mhm.
Um, Tell me a little bit about womb wounds. What is a womb wound and how does that play into your experience as an adolescent?
Yeah. So I believe that so much of what we're carrying in our wombs is actually ancestral.
Mm,
Zach Bush talks about how we carry trauma in our DNA for 14 generations, but you also think about how when we're just an egg, we're in our mother while she's in our grandmother's womb.
right,
So we're
right.
actually experiencing that world. Like, even though we're just an egg, it's like still carried in our DNA and in our memory of like everything she experienced when we were in her womb and then everything our mother experienced,
That's so
and
cool to think about. Yeah.
it's really cool. Especially when you're a curse breaker, it's really cool to think about because you're not only healing past generations, you're healing future generations when you break those curses of trauma. But I know for me, I was in my mother's womb while she was abused by my father. And then, had a lot of sexual trauma very early on. And as well as like think about the womb as it's your sexual center, it's your creativity. And
That's second chakra. Mm-hmm.
yeah. And I mean, there's not just the sexual trauma that I experienced, but the religious trauma that I experienced of sexuality being bad, and needing to cut down. Like I remember, yeah, like you think about womb trauma and you think about like it just happened, it's something that happened specifically to your womb, but it's also just what we carry there as a woman. And, I remember, and this is probably true for a lot of people, the first time that they're caught touching themselves, how their parents
Mm,
respond, that gets stored in the sexual center. And it's typically ends up being shame.
mm,
And
mm-hmm.
so there's so much stored there. And um, I know for me, using a cervical wand has been extremely healing, like speaking into the wand and then using it and then really reclaiming like my podcast is called Untamed and Unashamed, and that's really I took it as like naming it when I was coming up with the name, I was taking it as like, what do I want to be initiated into? And when I use my cervical wand for de-armoring of that space, there's typically a lot of pleasure at the end of it. But after I take the wand out, I'll take the juice and I'll put it like behind my ears and on my wrist. And that's a way of like reclaiming what's been shamed, like being so untamed and unashamed of anything that has to do with my body, what comes out of it, and my sexual expression. And
Yeah.
I was, posted a couple of days ago that like every mythic goddess story journeys to the underworld and it's like a part of her reclamation. And I truly feel that, especially for women, but for, I'm sure, mostly men as well, that our sexuality, like so much of our underworld experience is going in and sitting with that sexual shame and letting it be a reclamation.
Wow.
And part of that for me, it sounds so silly, but like part of that for me was um, doing that in a very unashamed way.
Yeah.
And and also talking about it, like
Yeah.
to grow up in a home where we could not ever even say a word that had to do with any body part that could be considered sexual, to now, I'm hosting a yoni worship party soon, like just all, like everything you can do to reclaim what was suppressed, for me.
I'm already wondering, do you have a cervical wand nearby that you could
Yeah.
show me?
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
she's going to get her cervical wand.
yeah. So I love, online tools. So this is like what a typical wand looks like. It's It's kind of
Okay, so
curved.
it's shaped like a dildo, but it has a curvature at the end to help you. Or is it a
Yeah,
curve? Oh yeah, it is
and
a curvature.
yeah, and this is like kind of more for like pleasure.
Gosh, that's
Um,
beautiful. It's
oh,
a
it's so
beautiful piece
pretty.
of glass. Yeah.
Control. Yeah.
Wow. If
But
you
the
guys are
silver
listening, make sure
one,
you check out the YouTube version of this, and you'll get to see some of these instruments. They're
yeah.
beautiful devices.
So I wanted to show you that one so that you could see the difference of the cervical wand. So the cervical
Oh, I see. I see.
is much longer and it's curved. So what happens when you use a cervical wand is not only does this touch the cervix, but because it's curved, you can turn it clockwise. And um, you typically want to do like 3, 6, 9, 12. However, any point where you feel a sensation, you stop and you breathe into it. So
Yeah.
you inhale into the sensation and you exhale and sound the sensation. And through that, you're de-armoring that area and um, moving whatever's stored there. And
Whoa.
it's so interesting because I brought up how a lot of it's ancestral. There's times when I'm using this and, I get to like the 3 o'clock and I inhale to feel exhale sound. And when I sound, there's like dozens of other women's sounds coming through me. And I don't know if that's something that's
Whoa.
collective, but for me, it feels really ancestral. It feels like I have goosebumps all over my body right now. It feels to me like it's a lot of the rape trauma that my Aztec Native American woman experienced. Through colonization. And
Yeah.
so, but it's like a wailing and it's not my voice. And so, yeah, so you can work with this. And that's just like an example of if you just want to see what's there, inhale, exhale sound, but you can also work with like a specific intention of, removing blockages to pleasure, because you think about also the yoni is so connected to the heart and to the throat. If you have a closed throat or you have a closed heart, you have a closed yoni. And
Yeah.
so really opening up that space and healing that space will not only open your heart, but it'll open your throat. And you look at even the images of the throat and the yoni, they're, so similar. And then my last tool that I love is the jade egg.
The egg. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God. I have used the jade egg at times and felt like I was on 5-MeO. Like it's
Whoa.
really, really powerful when you are using breath and energy. And,
Sure.
you can use the string to stimulate the G spot, the goddess spot.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of times that has become stagnant in a way.
Sure.
It's so like using this to move that energy while you sound, again, like with the cervical wand. But what I really like to do with my jade egg is with my hand, and this is something that's taught in the Taoist books and in like it's I think Taoist and Tantra both does this, but it's like you form a vortex with your hand under your yoni while you have the egg in, and then you move up your body, up your chakras, and whatever is like there, you ask the egg to take it. And then you like breathe, inhale, you thrust up to like take that energy. And then you exhale, sound, and move your pelvic down to the vortex and let the vortex take it. And I mean,
Whoa.
you really feel stuff remove. And
Yeah.
before I knew about the jade egg, I was doing something really similar with the Osho Divine Fuck,
Mm-hmm.
which is you picture your image of the divine masculine or God consciousness, however he shows up for you. And sometimes it's Jason Momoa, but whatever you want. So shows up.
Merman.
Yeah.
Or not merman. What is his Aquaman or whatever? Yeah.
I mean, and it can also, like, if you're uncomfortable with picturing an actual person, it can just be an image or a color. It can be whatever feels safe for you. I was joking about that. I typically actually picture Jesus, Yeshua, and that sometimes can feel triggering for people. But
Sure.
anyhow, with the Osho Divine Fuck, you do a similar practice as what I described with the jade egg, but you see this divine masculine with a 4-foot cock, and he goes into you while you're pleasuring yourself, and you allow him to take slowly with the 4-foot cock of consciousness, goes to the first chakra, takes what doesn't serve you, second, third, all the way up to the crown. So that was what I used to do. And then I found out about the jade egg and I started doing that practice. And oh my God, I mean, it is when I've only done 5-MeO once, but almost every time I use my jade egg, it's like I've taken
You're on the rocket ship. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, really powerful. And yeah.
Okay, so let me go back to Jason Momoa, because I have an important question here, because now I can't get this out of my mind. Would it be the Aquaman Jason Momoa, or would it be the Game of Thrones Jason Momoa?
The one that looks like Jesus.
You have a votive candle with Jason Momoa as Jesus holding a lamb. That is the most amazing candle I've ever seen. Where do you get those wands? Because a friend of mine, Emily Abbott at Psychedelic Gypsy, she sells wands that look exactly like that. So I'm curious if they're the same, if it's the same company, or she just sources them from the same place. Where do you recommend people go?
Wands, WAANDS.com,
Okay.
wands.com. Code Jade gets you a discount. I think it's like 20%. You want to use, it's especially like for anal plugs, like you want to be really careful that the company is like providing high quality things. Because if these chip and bacteria get stored in there, you know, so I really trust wands and I love their products. Also, before I knew, I mean, my name's Jade, so I
know I wasn't going to say the obvious, but I was like, she's got a jade egg. Yeah.
Oh my God. The first time I had this in and I felt like I was on 5-MeO, I was like, you know how sometimes you get goofy on psychedelics and you get this like download that like sounds silly once you're sober. I was like, this is why I was named Jade. But also, you know, the Taoist name for yoni is jade, jade fountain. And penis is jade stock. So it's really interesting. That
was my nickname in high school, Jade Stock. That's so funny. No, I'm just kidding.
But what I was going to say about the jade egg, I love it so much. However, it is getting a bit trendy to use. You don't want to use the black tourmaline that are also a little popular, because that, like the jade, the thing that's great about the jade egg is it's the crystal itself is completely balanced in yin and yang properties. So like it's great to work with in the yoni. The black tourmaline that a lot of people use, I mean, you can do it, but it's really intense. Like you're going to go really deep. And so, but what I was going to say is that because a lot of people are feeling like this is not ethical to like for these, a lot of people are just doing clear glass, like the wands.
Because of there's like a conflict, kind of like the conflict diamond. Okay, gotcha.
So I had this jade egg before I knew that, but there are clear crystal eggs for the, you know, and that's what my teacher promotes is using the clear crystal egg.
Okay. Yeah. They're beautiful. I mean, I also am thoughtful though about the, you know, I know crystals can become embedded, you know, with vibrational frequencies. So you have to clear your crystals once in a while. Do you also clear your wands and your egg?
So
I imagine the dark, like the jade and the obsidian types, those are going to embed very, very quickly. So I'm just kind of curious.
It's important, that you infuse them with light. So I do have this charging plate.
Oh yeah, it's a sacred geometry plate. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can charge it on selenite, which just transmutes all negative energy into positive energy.
Even that's so beautiful, like just as a piece of furniture. Yeah.
But my favorite method is under the full moon. Every full moon, charging it with the full moon energy. And I also, I just had a Vedic astrology last night, and it just confirms so much, but I'm also really meant to work with the sun. And I think it's why I'm so called to Huachuma. So I'm also going to start charging these under the sun as well, like for the early morning hours. But also this is an anal plug. And I think it's,
what type of material is that? It's like a pink. It's not quartz.
Aventurine.
Aventurine?
Yeah. So
cool.
I'm trying to think, what is his name? Jamie Wheel. He talks about how the asshole is the quickest way to God. So this is also a fun tool to use.
I believe that. Wow.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about this. So, you know, you come from a place, were you Catholic, Protestant, one of those growing up?
Well, I grew up in a home where we were going to a Christian mega
Oh,
church.
gotcha. Gotcha.
But I was also being abused pretty heavily at home. So it
Okay.
felt like, what are we doing? Like I'm getting beat and then we're getting in the car and going to church, So there was
Yeah.
never much there. Um, but when I was 15, I got adopted into a really religious family. And for them, any sort of sexual thought, desire, any of that outside of marriage was demonic. And
Wow.
and
Wow.
it was preached into us in a way that was very fear-based. So we would do these camps every 6 weeks where they would sit you down and have something that they called a deliverance. But they would cast demons out of you. And
Oh,
people would
man.
go into the thing that's crazy for me is I attended over 100 of these. I hosted one when I was 17, not trauma informed. They just gave me a mic and let me host this for 30 teenage girls. Like, I mean, the damage, it's like, I still
Whoa.
can't fathom how these people in their 30s
Yeah.
allow, I mean, I know for them, they thought they were doing God's work. So I get it. But anyhow, you would sit in this chair. And the thing that's crazy to me, I attended over 100 of them. They would cast out the demon of lust or the demon of anorexia, whatever, the demon of bisexuality, whatever it was. And people would start vomiting and they'd start like some would look like they were having seizures. So
Wow.
something was definitely happening. I don't know if, because entities are real, maybe they just took advantage of people in this
Yeah.
scenario. I have no clue. I'm still really sitting with all that happened there. But at the end, and you can imagine this was pretty freaky for all of us in the room, they'd say, okay, so you've now been cleansed. If you were cleansed of anorexia and you throw up and you go up, if you deprive yourself of food, or if you were cleansed of lust and you have a lustful thought, that demon will come back and bring 7 friends. And so like
Whoa.
it was such a terrifying thought to, as they would say, miss the mark. It was this preaching of original sin and never being good enough. And that's something
Yeah.
that I love so much about Tantra now, which I feel like is kind of my religion, is that there is no original sin. Like
Sure.
everything within us is goddess consciousness. Everything is holy.
Hmm.
And even those self-deprecating thoughts have a message and have consciousness. And when we work with them through internal family systems or inner child work, they really just want a seat at the table and they're really just protecting us. There's nothing bad in
Yeah.
Tantra, you
Yeah.
know?
The reason I asked you about your religion, I didn't know all of that even, but that actually reinforces my sort of, I don't know, my conjecture, which is that when you started, we'll just say self pleasure, your self pleasure journey,
Mhm.
how confronting must that have been for you,
Mhm.
given how afraid you'd been in this sort of state of fear about your own sexuality for all this time, and then at some point you started working out of that. And I'm sure that journey in and of itself is a whole story. But then when you actually did start pleasuring yourself, and perhaps even now when you use these wands, do those little inklings of fear come back up for you?
So in my 20s, when I would try to pleasure myself, I would not have any pleasure. I would end my practice with so much frustration and sometimes tears. Um, and I didn't know I just maybe thought I was broken. And I think I was listening to Dr. Drew back then, who like
Yeah, yeah, right, right. I remember him
said
on.
that kind of like this is normal for women in their 20s. And so I kind of just was like, oh, all right. Um,
Hmm,
but for me, my nervous system did not feel safe to feel pleasure. And I didn't know that in my 20s. I just honestly thought that I was doing it wrong or that I was broken or that I was afraid to ask for more in the bedroom
wow.
with partners. I was in my 20s, like
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't know how to ask for something, but my nervous system not only didn't feel safe for pleasure, um, but all that trauma that was in there in this space of my yoni and of not only from people who have transgressed it, but like from myself, from when I had abandoned myself and
Hmm.
not, because the yoni holds so much wisdom. So does the womb. Like as a woman, and men too, with their genitals, I can put my hand on my yoni and ask a question and feel a contraction or an expansion in it as a yes or no.
Wow.
And I didn't have that relationship in my 20s, but mostly, like most of the issue was that I did not feel safe to experience pleasure. Pleasure was dangerous. Pleasure was painful. And my nervous system also it was so wired for pain.
Yeah.
It wasn't wired for pleasure. And so without knowing all of that, I didn't really have a pleasure practice in my 20s because I was so tired of just ending it with frustration and tears. And then in my 30s, I started to want more in partnerships sexually. And that's when I started trying to figure out what my blockages were in sex. And through just asking that question, some sexual trauma came up that I didn't really remember, that I had blocked out. And so I worked with MDMA assisted therapy. And through that, not only did I become like this, 3 years ago, I was extremely sexually repressed without knowing it, even though I lived in the Playboy or stayed in the Playboy mansion for a summer in my 20s, even though I had shot 12 nude publications for Playboy in my 20s. Like you think that I was really expressed, but that was just rebellion, really. That was just like a form of rebellion for me. So once I started to heal this trauma about 3 years ago, I started to actually feel for this first time sexual, like a sexual being. And then through that, I started to really dive into, because anything that we want in our partnerships, anything that we want sexually that's external first has to happen internally. It's not our partner's responsibility to unlock our pleasure. And so if I wanted more pleasure, I knew that I needed to create that neural network that was possible for pleasure. I knew that I needed to feel safe for pleasure. And so that's when I started really looking into it and found Layla Martin, my teacher, started using the wands, and then started getting trained to help other women connect to their pleasure. And the first week of July, so I gave the example of in my 20s being so disconnected from my pleasure. The first week of July, I had somewhere around 70 to 80 orgasms.
Whoa.
Without a partner. And probably half of those without any touch. It was just using my breath and my energy. So that was like,
without any touch, did you just say?
About half of them had no touch.
Whoa.
Just working with my energy and my breath, because I have become so connected to my yoni, to my womb, to my pleasure, that just working with my breath, I can call on the type of orgasm that I want to have, whether it's a cervical, a full body, which chakra I want to feel it in. And I'm so thankful to Mama Gina's work. She wrote the book Pussy. And I didn't ever even say that word before I read that book, because in the book, she's like, just say it out loud and see how it feels. And I'm like, wow, it rolls off the tongue. It feels really good. But before that book, I had never even said it. So I'm so thankful to her work and to Layla's, but I truly feel like the most orgasmic woman, and I feel like I'm able to live my life from that place. And I mentioned to you before that this morning, how I prepared for this interview was a handful of orgasms, because it not only, when a woman is void of orgasms, not only is she missing out on all the chemicals that are very good for her health and her brain. And, there's 4 chemicals that are released when you orgasm that prevent all types of cancers and diseases, but also it's the best antidepressant, right? But so when a woman is void of that type of pleasure, not only is it not good for her health, but she's not usually walking around with this like queen-like confidence. When you just had an orgasm, you walk differently. You feel differently. You speak differently, because every time you have an orgasm, you feel afterwards, you have and hold more confidence.
Yeah.
It's part of the chemicals release, but it's also part of like the fact that you just experienced pleasure. it feeds your worthiness. It's also an ego destroyer, because no one after an orgasm is like, oh, I'm not good enough. It's like, I am awesome, like so many things. So it's my favorite thing to do before an interview. Yeah.
So how many orgasms did you have before this interview, Jade?
Just 3.
Oh, just 3.
Yeah.
Let me take a sip of water after that. Okay, great. Yeah, that's, one thing that really comes up for me, and I think a lot of people who are equally confronted by the conversation of sexuality, and anybody out there is confronted by sexuality, because our society still carries these taboos, and they run very deep. I mean, the source of a woman's power was her sexuality, and that's why we had to repress them over
Yeah.
the ages. And I don't know if you've heard I just did this 2.5-hour solo cast on the history of a brief history of medicine, Western medicine, women healers, and witches. And through that history, you see that the sexuality was the most confronting thing about women, and that was the main angst that the church and the state had, and the main scorn that they had for women. So this runs very deep in our culture. We know that. So
Yeah.
anybody out there listening might not want to like hearing what you're saying, but secretly kind of want to know a little bit more.
Mhm.
And I want to acknowledge that and honor that this is not just like, hey, come on, just start having orgasms all the time, guys. Get a wand and stick this big silver, beautiful wand into your yoni and talk to your cervix. And like, I get it. Like it is a lot.
Mhm.
And the learning edge, those places where we, you can call it the shadow or whatever else, but that's actually where most of us need to start living at least more than 0.01% of our time. We maybe need to start living there and leaning into that a little bit more if we want to see growth in the ways that we're hoping to grow. And I think sexuality is the number one thing, especially in the way that our society looks at maidens, the young girl with, perky boobs. And by the way, can you just very quickly talk about your Playboy photo shoot? Because I meant to bring that into the business of birth control. We'll put a pin in this. Tell us what the photographer at Playboy told you.
So I want to say that, but really quickly, I do believe that majority of our wounds and trauma is rooted in our sexuality, whether it's shame or
I
sexual
believe that.
self. And so
Yeah.
when we heal that, what I've found is that it ripples out into all areas of our life.
Yeah.
Whereas sure, like inner child work is really powerful and it's a part of sexual healing, but it doesn't always ripple out into every area.
Right.
I found that when we heal our sexuality, it truly does affect all areas of your life. And then you brought up just sticking this in. So
Yeah.
one thing I really want to point out, don't ever stick anything in your yoni without a full yes from your yoni, whether that's a tampon, a wand, a finger,
a penis,
anything. You want a full yes. And you also don't ever just, oh, well, I only have 5 minutes, I'm going to cram it in. You have to go around the vulva, like take your time, make it to where your yoni is sucking it in. You don't even have to put it in, it's being sucked in. Like that is how you build trust with your yoni. And that is how you learn to listen to it.
Oh
So
my
that's
God.
really,
That's
really
amazing.
important. Yeah, that's really important. Because otherwise you're just re-traumatizing yourself.
Yeah. And I mean, intercourse is like that for partners, for any partner out there. Like sometimes it's like she is like taking me in and I'm not even pushing. It's just like, and it's so much different.
Yeah. When the lubricant hasn't happened, it's the book that I would recommend is Tao Tantric Arts of Sexuality or Woman's Arousal, Women's Anatomy of Arousal. Those 2 books will talk about all the dangers of allowing something in your yoni before it has.
What was the first book that you mentioned?
It is
Tao's
Tao Tantric Arts.
Tao Tantric Arts. Okay.
Yeah, I believe that's what it is. Mink De Vos is the writer.
Got it. Perfect.
So that's huge. Otherwise, you're just re-traumatizing yourself and building more of a blockage between you and your yoni. So with the Perky Breast with Playboy, I think I was 25. And, as a model, I was crash dieting all the time.
Yeah.
And crash dieting gives your breasts are not perky during crash dieting. If you're withholding food and then like eating all in one day and then you have a shoot so you don't eat for 3 days, like your boobs are just going to lose their fat and be
Yeah.
I don't want to say saggy, but they're not going to have their shape. And so I remember one of my first Playboy shoots, the photographer said, if I wanted to make Playmate, then I was going to have perkier breasts, but he wanted me to keep them natural. And so he told me to get on birth control. And so I did. And again, just like when I was 15, within 3 months, I was having massive headaches. I couldn't be in a room that was light. I had to have really dim lightings in all rooms because I just had these massive migraines. And I felt like a crazy person.
Wow.
Like I could not have a civil conversation with someone. I always felt heated. And so luckily I got off of it pretty quickly. But yeah, that was another time on birth control for a silly reason. But that is another thing that we really have so much control over, the perkiness of our breasts. If you do breast massage and the Taoist direction is going down on the outside, up on the inside, and then for a few minutes with oil. And it's really powerful if you're eye gazing in the mirror and saying, I love you while doing this. Most people don't look at themselves in the mirror, except for when they're like fixing something or, glancing in themselves in the morning. If you sit in the mirror and stare into your eyes saying, I love you, so much can come up. But if you're also doing that while massaging your breast with oil, so the Taoist direction, down on the outside, up on the inside for a few minutes, and then you reverse it, it's really important that you don't do that if you have something like breast cancer or anything like that you don't want to spread. But if you do that a few times a week as your self-care practice, not only are you opening your heart center, but you're building fullness and perkiness in your breasts. And so that's a really
Amazing.
powerful. Also, especially after breastfeeding, not only are you rebuilding that perkiness and fullness, but it's a way of like offering your breast gratitude through massage for all that they've done.
Yeah, they've carried you and this baby through. And yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I forgot that we were going to get into that topic. The reason I actually brought the Playboy thing up was, by the way, did you make Playmate? I don't know if I know that part of the story.
So there was I was offered 4 different contracts and I took the shortest one. When I stayed there, I didn't stay there as long as I had planned, and I just didn't, I felt, it was really lonely, even though, there were tons of parties, and there was something really creepy there for me. Like I could feel, I don't know, I could feel this energy there that I was afraid to be alone in a room. And so,
Weird. Wow.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, so it's not the path I ended up choosing. I did shoot like 12 different spreads for them and campaigns. I did it, a couple of movie campaigns like Safe, Sons of Anarchy. Like I did a couple campaigns for them, and then did a couple of tours for them. But I didn't end up taking the big contract. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you sharing all of that. I know it seems abrupt for people listening, but I was thinking back to a photographer who's going to photograph a 20-something-year-old woman, 26, I think you said, and they're saying, you're beautiful. You were also in a UFC ring girl, right?
Yeah, I was with Bellator and then Invicta, which is UFC.
Oh, gotcha. The competitors. So you're obviously this beautiful woman. You've got this great spirit. You've got this great energy. We want to put you in our magazine. But albeit perfect, we want you to be more perfect. And we want you to actually be more of the maiden archetype, which is the perkier breasts, as opposed to somebody who... Had you had children at the time?
No.
No. So it was just before Soul, right?
About 4 years before him. I think that the issue with my breast was all the crash dieting from trying to be thin for shoots. Yeah.
Or you're just perfect as you are, but we need you to look this particular way. We're going to use these pharmaceuticals to do that. So what I wanted to get into is some archetypal transitions that you've been through in your life, because the one last thing that we haven't really got into that I want to make sure we have at least a few minutes to talk about is, in our society, along with scorning women for their sexuality, the source of their magic, their power. As we transition through our lives, men and women go through these archetypal transitions, and it's not a clear delineation. But with motherhood, it does probably feel more delineated than others. So as you transitioned from maiden, this woman who was being valued, as a photographable, beautiful woman, nude model, taking birth control in order to perk up her breasts, etc., like going through that whole thing of
Mhm.
being the sort of in the male gaze, and then transitioning to the queen archetype or the mother or the empress, I've also heard it called.
Mhm.
Can you talk about what that was like for you and how perhaps that, I mean, was it confronting for you to make that archetypal transition, or was it actually healing for you?
Yeah. So when I first became a mother, I didn't really make that transition um, because all of the money I had ever made was from being a maiden.
Yeah.
And all of the acceptance and desire I felt from my partner at the time was from being a maiden. I actually felt really rejected as the mother. And so I actually really pushed that away for the
Mm.
first few years of being a mother. Um,
Oh, wow.
yeah, I had an interview with someone, Diary of an Honest Mom, and we talk a bit about this um, and I also, I had a really traumatic C-section, and then 12 months later had another one. And so my recovery wasn't great. And I was, breastfeeding two kids at one time. And so I was stepping into the mother role in that sense, but like the actual archetype where I felt the power of a mother, I didn't hold that energy for a few years. Um, and that was something I used to hold a lot of guilt and shame around, because I also didn't feel like mothering came natural to me. I didn't
Mm.
grow up with a mother.
Mm.
I was never taught how to mother. And it wasn't until I learned from Mother Ayahuasca what it's like to be a mother, what it's like to be mothered. I would drink of her cup, and then she would sing to me and she would read me stories. And I had never experienced that. And so once I experienced that from her, I realized how comforting and how wonderful it felt when I did it for my children. And also, I was not on plant medicine. I just did the Opus bed, which is the bed that uses movement with sound. And I had this experience where I went back and saw my entire childhood, um, all the painful parts, all the times that I um, watched the violence, the times that violence were inflicted on me. And I saw myself hitchhiking, and all the times I felt alone and that I really
Mm.
just wanted a mother. And then it went all the way back to the beginning, and Mary Magdalene showed up as my mother. And she covered me with her red cloak through all of that. And she was just protecting me. And even when the hitchhiking, there was like this group of, we'll call them bad characters, but I don't really want to, use that, but I don't know what else to say. But, and she used her cloak to like shield me so that they couldn't see me. And she was just there all along the way. And so once I started to allow that guide of mine to mother me and
Mm.
allow myself to feel open to experiencing Mother Ayahuasca in those ceremonies, then it also empowered me to learn how to reparent and to mother my inner child. And that, when I started to mother my inner child, that's when I really felt like I stepped into the mother archetype. And that is also when I felt like I knew what to give my children, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
and
That's
and also,
powerful.
yeah, and I also firmly believe that the mother archetype does not need children to step into mother archetype. She also is not just a mother to her children. The mother archetype is mother to all children, to everyone in the room that's in need. And I think one of our first deep conversations, we were talking about all the controversial topics. And I told you, like, before I'm anything, I'm a protector of children. And I think that's
Yeah.
what the mother archetype is.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you say that your births were traumatic, of your two children?
So the first one, absolutely. My partner was drunk. I had to drive myself to the airport, I always say airport, to the hospital with my
You said
contract.
that to me when we were at the
I
springs as
always say
well.
airport every time. So I'm trying to get out of here. So I had to drive myself to the hospital, carry my own bags. I could feel his stress and I could feel mine. And so not only was that like his experience coming into the world, but I was also just terrified. Like I was trembling the whole time. And of course, the doctor saying, okay, we're going to do a C-section. And I'm just terrified and in this trauma state. Like, I mean, I barely remember it, and then a year later, because I had that C-section, I had to have one, is what they said, with my daughter, because it had only been 12 months. And I also barely remember that. Like it's like I blacked out, and was just like out of body. And, I'm 38 this year. So I don't know that it'll happen, but I know that there's some astrological markings that say I'll have a child at 42. And like a channeler has said that. I don't know. Maybe not, and I have seen a female soul like show up at times on and I'm like, reroute, not ready.
You just text me when you get that positive pregnancy test. I'm kidding. Nathan.
Well, there's part of me that is like, to experience that with someone who I'm actually in sacred union with, that someone who's like actually going to hold me physically while I'm squatting and, experiencing this birth fully in my body. And also, I'm sure you're familiar with like using Tantra to prepare your womb for an orgasmic birth. And so there's all these things that I want to experience. I don't know for sure that I'll do that. I have a girlfriend that I've led through healing her C-section trauma, and she was on medicine, and she experienced everything that I just said on the medicine and felt like she healed that trauma through experiencing what she would have wanted on the medicine, and also felt like she truly experienced it, So
was she taking ayahuasca? Is that what you mean?
Mushrooms.
Oh, mushrooms. Okay.
Yeah.
What does a closing sort of ceremony look like post birth? Like what could women do who are feeling, neglected, unseen, unheard, violated perhaps? What advice do you have for them about how, to close that loop? Similar to integrating a really hard or challenging experience with mushrooms, LSD, whatever, ayahuasca. Closing that circle, off. And our friend Kyle, he got stuck in this loop where every night he was reliving hell, and our friend Paul Check had to help him close that off. But that's between them as to what that was. I think that birth is even more a sacred rite of passage in many regards. If it's, which I don't mean to compare things. That's not really what I meant to do there. But birth, I think, is an experience of its own that requires some closing. So what did you do for yourself, or what advice maybe do you have for women out there who may have experienced birth trauma and now want to know how to close that off, to ceremonial close
it? Would be similar to what I led that woman through. And it's similar to what you do with all trauma, is completing the stress cycle. So the trauma is still in the body until you complete that stress cycle. And in order to complete that stress cycle, you have to go back in. And this can be very gentle. A lot of times we think because trauma is so intense that the healing has to be intense, but that's not true. Trauma integration can be pleasurable and it can be gentle. And that also protects us from re-traumatization as well.
Yeah, of course.
So, going back into the trauma in a very safe and held way, doing a lot of work and preparation beforehand to let your nervous system know it's safe to be here, knowing that the person holding the container really, really has you in a safe, loving, and held place, and that you can trust that. So that's huge. Just that one grounding cord is huge. But going back into that experience and doing the same with breath work, whether you're using a wand or not, inhaling, feeling the sensation of the trauma, whether it's a tightness in the chest, whether it's a heaviness in the womb, like inhaling into that, really feeling that sensation, exhaling, sounding it. And then through, you can do that for a little while. And then this is really powerful, especially with sexual trauma. After sounding it all and moving it through the body, you can either, there's a couple different ways you can do this. You can either use like an internal family systems type situation and emotional freedom technique where you incorporate tapping and matrix reimprinting, but you can go back into that experience and say it's you at 13, and you have a conversation with her. You allow her to tell you all that she's feeling and all that she's needing and all that she's wanting. And then you give her a new ending, a new outcome. You either allow her to stand up to that perpetrator, or to run away, or to come live with you, whatever it's going with your inner queen, and you complete the stress cycle in that way. Because the mind, we know that time isn't linear. So the only way that our trauma still has hold on us is if it's still existing in the body. If we go back and we give it a new outcome, our mind doesn't know the difference, and it's healed, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
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 So that's one way. If you're going to use like that type of technique, or after the breath work, you yourself can act out how you would have, say you went into fight or flight or freeze or whatever it is. You can, after using that breath work, act out, which has been really, really powerful for some clients that are really big in their expression, especially.
Yeah.
Act out how you would have wanted to respond in that scenario. And that's how you close the cycle. Then in my work, you always end with pleasure, because it allows your brain to realize, oh, it didn't steal my pleasure. It didn't steal my power. I can go into that. I can feel the pain. I can tap into that anger, and then I can go to pleasure. It creates a new neural network. And it doesn't mean in the future that you're always going to go to pleasure when that memory comes up, but you at least have the new path,
Yeah.
and you know that it's there.
Wow.
Um, yeah. So you would do the same with the birth trauma. You would tap into the sensations, that whether it's shame or guilt or abandonment, whatever it was that you experienced in this birth plan that didn't happen. Inhale to feel it, exhale to sound it. And then you would complete the cycle by giving yourself that experience, either mentally using that first method, or I've seen just through breathwork women look, sound like they're giving birth. And in
Mm.
experience, they felt like they gave a home birth. So yeah, it's all about completing that stress cycle.
That's amazing. Jade, you're such a breath of fresh air, truly. I'm really glad that we've gotten to be friends. You've got my wheels turning. I have nothing to add to that. I mean, you are so articulate and so intelligent and thoughtful about some really important things in the world right now. And I think sexuality being the first, but then trauma, womb wounds. I mean, this is really where it's at. So as your work progresses, let's definitely do another part as you are
Yeah.
exploring some of these topics a little deeper. We'll do like a round 2 someday,
Mhm.
and maybe get into some of the birth stuff specifically, because I know quite a bit of my audience is midwives who are helping their clients cope with birth trauma, and there isn't really a good like standard protocol for how to do this. There's a lot of it's just a really personalized, very sensitive thing, and many of us are not really trained to do it. So I'm so glad that you're out there doing it, and when you start being able to offer your perspective to people, and maybe travel and work with women who are going through these things, it does feel like I feel kind of held in a way as well, because I kind of feel like I've got nothing to offer you. Like, we can talk this through, but this
Mhm.
needs to go deeper.
Mhm.
And I don't want or feel that I'm necessarily always capable of holding that space for somebody, but I would feel confident with you doing that, for holding even space for me. I mean, you make me feel just so safe. And
Oh,
um, yeah,
my number one desire in the containers that I hold is that people feel safe. Because a lot of times, I mean, you can know dozens of methods for healing, but if you don't hold a safety and a presence, it's not going to be effective.
yeah,
More than anything, the most effective thing is that you hold a safe presence, because most people haven't experienced that. And that alone is, it's so healing. And then it allows the nervous system to open.
yeah.
The one thing I was going to add about the sexuality and the suppression is that women's power is in our sexuality. And a lot of people don't like that sentence because they
Oh,
don't
yeah.
want to feel like it's not their brain or it's not their heart. But we have so much power in our sexuality. And the reason why we don't like that sentence is because it's been so suppressed,
That's
because
exactly right.
country and this culture is so afraid of women's power. They're afraid of it.
Yeah.
And so suppress it. And if we can start to heal that, I mean, it'll heal the world. So
Huge. Yeah. Jade, how can people find you and work with you or just talk, maybe apprentice with you? I mean, whatever. People are going to hear this and going to be like, oh my gosh, here's a person who knows things that I have every interest in, but I have nowhere to turn.
yeah. So my podcast is Untamed and Unashamed, and I talk about this in a lot of episodes. I'm the host, so I don't talk as much, of course, as I did on this one, but I bring in people like you who have so much wisdom on these areas, and so that's the podcast. All of my social media handles are at the Jade Bryce. And my email is just jadebryce@gmail.com. And I typically I feel that I'm here in service of women's sexuality. And so what I typically offer is a 4-session um, minimum, where I work with women on reopening to that power, feeling safe to experience pleasure, feeling worthy and deserving of pleasure. I
There it
also
is right there. Yeah. Worthiness. That's
Yes. Oh
big.
my God, it's all worthiness. Yeah. Worthiness and deservingness. So I do work with men on it. I'm specifically trained to work with women. I will be trained for men in the future, but I still have male clients that have. So one, if I can share one story really quick, this man had sexual trauma when he was 12. As my client, he was in his 50s. He hadn't dated a woman in over 30 years because
Wow.
in almost 30 years, because she had cheated on him with his best friend. He closed his heart, had not gone on a single date, hadn't experienced any self-pleasure, any of that stuff. And after our 4th session, he approached a woman in a flower shop, took her out on a date, and they're now married. So he like opened.
What?
Yeah, but the main thing is that I was the first person that he had ever spoken that sexual trauma to, because so many people, I've even gone on podcasts where once the mic ends, they're like, "I never told anybody this, but this happened to me." Like, so many people have sexual trauma that they've never even spoken. And
Wow.
so yeah, all that to say, I do have male clients. I'm specifically trained to work with women. That's what I'm certified in. But yeah, I do hold space for both.
Amazing. Well, hopefully people flock your way, Jade. I hope we're friends for a good long time.
Oh, we will
I
be.
mean that. Next time I'm in Austin, I will I'll see if there's something that we can work on together, because I would love to just experience um, the going in deep. And yes, I've had some very deep journeys in my life, but doing it without medicine is a little harder. And not harder, it's just a little, we think we need to add something from the outside to go deep. And clearly through your work, that's not, it's actually all right here. And even
So
adding these,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Well, what I found is, because I used to feel that way as well. What I found is that through working with the breath, because breath work releases DMT as well, so we get a bit of that effect. But through working with the breath and tapping, I'm actually able to go into deeper places, because I think that my higher self knew, in order to go into these deeper traumas, I really needed to be in my
Yeah,
body.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's not always the case, but without plant medicine, I don't know that I would have ever opened up to that possibility.
Yeah,
So
amen. That's exactly where I am now. It's like, I've gone deep multiple times now. If I could, utilizing breath work and some other basic techniques, that is where it's at. I mean, and even this early psychedelic research, like Stan Groff, when they started, opposing the use of LSD, for example, in clinical research, he was like, well, let's try to do this with breath, and he developed holotropic breathing. So like, it's possible. It's just that that's like a bypass, like a fast track to outer space whenever you take medicine. So we will
yeah,
definitely do some work together.
if I'm not mistaken, on plant medicine, your ego can still somewhat get in the way.
Mm,
When you use breath, the thing about breath work is it gets you out of cortical control, where you're deciding right and wrong,
yeah, yeah.
So there's a lot of power in breath work, but they both have their place for healing, and I love them both. Yeah.
There's a style of breathing. The next time I'll send you some a text after we get off. But there's a style of breathing we used in our own birth, which I don't know if I told you about, but we were doing effigy breath work, which is a hyperventilatory, conscious hyperventilating, and it's not the belly breathing. It's very, very, very unique. And outside of pregnancy, it kind of is. It's astral. You're out there. But
Mhm.
while my wife was pregnant and we did it, it was very grounding. It got her very much inside. And then we did it during the birth, and it was like an hour and a half of labor, and then the baby came out asleep, like the portal
Oh
opened and
my
closed.
gosh.
Fucking wild. But that type of breath work is as close to. I have another friend who has had 10 natural births. She's like, that is as close to the childbirth experience doing this breath work as I've ever experienced outside of childbirth. And
Oh,
then and so, for me, that type of breath work is the only one that has gotten me to feel like, whoa, I am looking at myself. The ego has apparently dissolved because I am not even aware any longer of the breathing. It's on autopilot, and now I'm doing some work, and you can feel stuff coming out through your hands and feet and out through your mouth, and it's like, whoa, what is this? So
and it's
maybe
really
we'll,
fun to do it with a partner. Sometimes
yeah,
you do it with a partner and you'll have the exact same experience and you'll come out of the breath work saying the same thing. It's really
yeah, yeah. Like you had this shared collective experience. Yeah. Wow.
uh,
Well,
mm,
clearly we have a lot more to talk about, Jade. So,
yeah.
thank you for spending some time with me today, and I'm sure we'll be in touch soon.
Yeah. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.